She didn't raise her hand, didn't blink, didn't move, even as a three-star general stepped into the hall. Everyone else saluted. She stood still. And when asked why, she said just 7 words, words that stopped 100 soldiers cold, words that turned cameras off and history back on. What happens when someone who was erased finally speaks? Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. At Fairbanks Field, an Air Force support base tucked in the chill of Montana mornings. Most days began before the sun rose, but Maya Ellison had already been at work an hour earlier. Her boots traced the same quiet path across the tarmac, passing between rows of idle Humvees and freight pallets, unnoticed. She always walked alone, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other, jacket zipped high against the cold. Her office wasn't really an office, just a converted storage shed tucked behind the comms building, labeled Technical Coordination Unit in fading stencil. Inside, she checked targeting calibrations, ran diagnostics on weapons training gear, and logged ammo inventory down to the last casing. By the time other staff stumbled in yawning, she'd already reset the firing range cameras and swept brass from the floor. No one asked her how. No one thanked her. To most people, she was just a tech contractor, one of those civilians in regulation gray, with no insignia on the shoulders and no name in the chain of command. The younger recruits barely noticed her, except to joke. She lives in that back room. Right, I swear she teleports. She's here before the lights are on. One smart-mouthed private once called her the ghost of Bay 4. They all laughed. She didn't. She rarely looked up. Lieutenant Barrett, a recent ROTC graduate with too much starch in his collar, once barked at her in front of a maintenance crew. Your layout's all wrong. Where's your section chief? She just turned off the power drill, nodded silently, and moved the crate exactly 6 inches without a word. He scoffed, made a face, and strutted off like he'd corrected some intern. Others barely spoke to her unless something broke. And when it did, she fixed it, quietly, always in the background. That Monday morning, the base felt different. Airmen and staff were trimming banners. Flags were inspected for dust. A stage was erected near the assembly hall, and a fresh coat of wax glistened on the hallway floors. A general was visiting, not just any general, General Patrick Vance, 3-star, decorated, a staple in recruitment videos and leadership handbooks. He was scheduled to tour the facility, deliver a speech, and cut a ribbon for the newly expanded officer quarters. Cameras would be rolling. Footage would be fed into the Armed Forces Leadership Campaign, with clips sent to Congress and recruiters nationwide. The buzz around base was electric. Colonels rehearsed greetings. The logistics team was briefed 6 times. Someone even brought in a barber to trim beards to regulation. Maya had finished checking the speaker system before sunrise. She cleaned up after herself, returned to the tech bay, and watched the official briefing scroll across her screen. All personnel, military and civilian, were required to attend the general's address and stand information. Salute protocol mandatory. She sighed quietly and powered down her monitor. By 09:30, the assembly hall was packed. Rows of fatigue stood at attention. Boots aligned in near-perfect symmetry. Officers clustered toward the front. Crisp uniforms bearing medals that caught the morning light through tall glass panels. In the far back corner, Maya stood alone, her posture upright, hands clasped behind her back. No insignia, no cap, just the standard tech jacket and a blank expression. Staff Sergeant Elkins from Public Affairs scanned the crowd, headset in his ear, tablet in hand, his brow furrowed. He nudged Barrett. She's not saluting. Barrett looked, immediately annoyed. Seriously, even contractors know the damn protocol. She's making us look sloppy. They didn't move toward her yet. The general hadn't arrived. A new face turned in the crowd. Captain Naomi Beck, recently transferred from Kandahar to take over internal security, narrowed her eyes at Maya. She'd seen that posture before. That rigid, weight-balanced stillness. Not like a civilian avoiding attention, more like someone trained to wait for impact. Beck leaned to the comms officer beside her. Who is she? No idea. Just a support tech. Shows up early. Never speaks unless asked. Beck didn't reply. Her gaze stayed fixed. Then, the doors opened. A wave of movement swept the room as General Vance stepped in, flanked by two colonels and a major. His boots clicked with the clean rhythm of confidence. Cameras tracked his entrance. Applause rippled. And as he crossed the threshold, the entire room, every soldier, officer, staffer, and civilian snapped to attention and raised their right hands in salute. Except her. Maya stood perfectly still. Her hands didn't move. Her eyes didn't blink. Barrett noticed first and couldn't help himself. You civilian or not, stand at attention and salute. The general heads turned. The whisper started like static. Who is that? She didn't salute. She's asking for trouble. Disrespectful. The general's pace slowed. He looked toward the disturbance. Staff Sergeant Elkins whispered something. The general paused, adjusted his collar, and began walking toward the back row. The cameras followed. So did silence. He stopped 5 feet from Maya. His voice was steady, formal. Is there a problem here? Specialist Maya met his eyes. Her voice was quiet, measured, not shaking. You left my unit to die. Sir. The room stopped breathing. The general blinked, confused. I don't recognize you. What unit? Her answer was calm, but it hit like a charge detonated under the floor. Echo 9, Camp Mercer, October 15, 2016. A few officers flinched. One colonel's face turned to stone. Another turned pale, lips pressed into a line. The general's aide moved closer, whispering urgently. The general raised a hand. No, not yet. I don't recall that specific operation, he said, slowly. You should, Maya said simply, then fell silent again. The entire event derailed in seconds. Cameras turned off, staffers redirected. The senior NCOs herded the personnel out with firm, professional urgency. Barrett stormed off, flustered. Elkins tried to joke, but no one laughed. Maya didn't move. Captain Beck stayed behind, eyes narrowed, hands folded, lips pressed tight in thought. She'd heard that unit name before. A file locked behind 2 levels of clearance. A mission that had no confirmed survivors. And a single line in red text. Status unreliable. Witness dismissed. She turned toward Maya and walked forward. Not to scold, not to question, but because something had just cracked open in front of them. Something buried. Something heavy, and the woman standing silent in the back might not be just a ghost after all. The moment the words left Maya's mouth, the entire command structure began to fracture beneath polished boots and perfect uniforms. You left my unit to die, sir. It echoed long after she stopped speaking. Whispers sharpened into murmurs, then into something heavier tension rippling like pressure before a storm. General Vance's face locked into composure, but a vein pulsed at his temple. Without a word, he turned to his aide, who immediately spoke into his comms. The cameras were cut, lenses capped. The public affairs team began clearing the room with clipped apologies. A major discreetly gestured to 2 base security officers. Escort her, quietly, away from the press. They approached Maya with a forced smile. Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us. She didn't resist, just gave a single, deliberate nod, then walked between them down the side corridor. Behind the scenes, chaos cracked through ceremony. Several officers murmured that she must be mistaken. Echo 9 never heard of it. That's classified beyond classified. There were no survivors from Mercer. That's on record. Others whispered darker things. She's unstable. She fabricated that. No way a tech support civilian was embedded in recon, and yet something didn't sit right. Captain Naomi Beck hadn't moved. She remained at the edge of the now empty hall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She'd spent enough time on classified bases in Kandahar to know when something had been buried too neatly. She walked briskly to the operations center and requested restricted access under Security Clause Delta 9. It took 2 hours of quiet persistence and one emergency authorization request. But Beck finally found what she was looking for. Buried in the outdated digital archives was a log from specialist Drew Fenwick, comms technician, dated October 2016. The file wasn't labeled under Echo 9. It was simply tagged Camp Mercer, Signal Relay Grid 41 SMB. It mentioned a distress transmission rerouted mid-operation. It ended with this line: override confirmed. Unit Echo 9 declared unrecoverable. Debrief deferred. Witness unstable. The entry had been flagged once for deletion, then archived again in a non-indexed backup server. Beck sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Something was very wrong. That night, in the old tech bay behind the comms building, Maya worked late, as always. Her hands moved through tangled wires and signal boards like memory, not thought. She kept her gaze low, her breath steady, but she felt the shift in the air, how people glanced at her now, then looked away just as quickly. Rumors were spreading. Some said she'd embarrassed the base. Others whispered she'd broken protocol. One corporal muttered near the mess hall, "If she really was part of a recon team, where's her record? Why didn't anyone know?" Why, indeed. Across the base, Lieutenant Sarah Lohman, an intel officer assigned to logistics oversight, had been watching everything unfold. Sarah wasn't high-ranking, barely 30, but she had a knack for pattern detection and an uncomfortable feeling about the sudden wall of silence surrounding Maya. She remembered a conversation 2 months back. She'd asked Maya why she always checked the same equipment rack twice. Maya had just smiled faintly and replied, "Because once is for the checklist, twice is for the memory." At the time, Sarah had thought it was just quirky. Now, it felt like code. She returned to the data archive that night, well after hours. Using her clearance, she accessed the legacy backup logs. Not the new cloud terminals, the old external drives stored in metal drawers, tagged by hand in faded Sharpie. She scanned drive after drive until she found one labeled Camp Mercer Comm Ops deactivated 2017. She inserted it into the terminal and waited. It blinked twice, then opened. Inside were disjointed files, partial transcripts, one damaged video fragment in a single .txt file labeled Final Log, E9 TS Ellison. Her breath caught. She opened it. The file was short, time-stamped October 17, 2016. Team status 5, KIA. Comms destroyed. Supplies gone. I'm crawling west toward fallback grid, carrying tags. Will document everything if I make it. If found, tell command this wasn't weather. This was deliberate. Take Maya Ellison. Echo 9, Sarah sat back, heart pounding. Not contractor, not background staff. Technical sergeant, recon communications, embedded deep, somewhere in the dark corridors of her mind. Maya remembered that day, the heat pressing on her skin, the smoke filling her lungs, the sharp scent of metal and burning nylon, her hands clutching 6 dog tags tight in one fist, pressing them against the gash on her side to stop the bleeding. The jungle canopy above shimmered and blurred. She dragged herself across mud, vines, and roots, the weight of a broken radio pack digging into her back. Flies gathered near the bandages she'd improvised from a torn undershirt. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just kept crawling west toward the fallback zone. And when she finally collapsed near the border checkpoint at Forward Outpost Rains, they hadn't greeted her like a hero. They hadn't saluted. They'd rushed her into quarantine, treated her burns, hooked her to IVs, and then 2 officers in pressed uniforms arrived. They took her tags, her notebook, her uniform jacket. They said, "Your story doesn't match our grid logs. You must have been confused, delirious," one nurse whispered later. "They told us not to file a report. You were never here." Then they transferred her out, quietly. New orders, new title, no rank, just a badge that said civilian contractor, technical logistics back in the present. Lieutenant Sarah Lohman printed out the final log file. She slipped it into a folder and walked straight to Captain Beck's quarters. Beck read it once, then again. When she looked up, her voice was tight. She was erased. Sarah nodded. They buried her with the unit. The next morning, the mood across Fairbanks Field was strange. No formal statements had been made. No official record addressed the outburst from the day before, but people were whispering, avoiding eye contact. Maya sat in the comms bay, as always, reviewing fault codes on aging calibration systems. She said nothing, didn't look up, but one by one, soldiers who had ignored her began watching her differently. Some still doubted, some were just afraid, and one or two began to remember things they had dismissed, like how she never flinched during thunderous test detonations, how she corrected frequency codes in her head, how she once caught a targeting drift on a live-fire sim that saved an entire line of cadets from a misfire. No one asked how she knew. They just assumed she was strange. Now they were realizing she wasn't strange. She was trained, and someone had worked very hard to make sure they forgot. That evening, Sarah found Maya alone in the storage bay, replacing fuses on a damaged interface panel. She held out the file. "Captain Beck wants you to have this." Maya didn't reach for it. "I've read it," Sarah said. "Your final log. From Camp Mercer. Still." Maya didn't speak, so Sarah tried again. "They said your witness statement was unreliable, but it wasn't. I believe you." Maya finally met her eyes. There was no triumph there, no relief, just fatigue. "I didn't keep that file for belief," she said quietly. "I kept it so I'd remember I didn't hallucinate my team dying." Then, after a long pause, "They didn't deserve silence." Sarah nodded. "We're going to find the rest. Captain Beck is already reopening the archive. She has clearance." Maya exhaled. Not relief, just breath. Like she'd been holding it for 8 years, and somewhere far away, in a basement server untouched since 2016, lines of code began to light up, and names long deleted began to reappear. The door to the intelligence conference room hissed shut behind them. Reinforced walls, no windows. Digital locks at every angle, a room built for secrets, not truth. Inside sat 12 people, General Patrick Vance at the head, flanked by 2 senior aides, 3 base commanders, a legal officer from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and Captain Naomi Beck. Maya stood at the far end, alone, but unwavering. There was no salute, no protocol, only tension. General Vance adjusted his collar and opened with a tone both composed and sharp. "I agreed to this meeting out of respect for the chain of command, but I must say, up front, I reject the insinuation that I left any unit behind without due cause." He looked directly at Maya. "Operations at that level are governed by layered priorities. Risk versus reward. If your unit was compromised, I grieve that, but I followed procedure." Maya didn't flinch. She reached into her jacket and placed a small tin box on the table. She opened it. Inside were 6 dog tags, scorched and worn, strung together by paracord. "This is Captain Elijah Ross," she said quietly, placing one tag forward. "Shot in the chest at grid 41 SMB. He called for evac while bleeding out. You never responded." The room fell silent. She lifted a second tag. "Sergeant Cole DeWitt. Shrapnel to the ribs shielding our comms pack. He died protecting the message that never got through." A third, Corporal Tara Fan. "Lung collapsed. Held the perimeter for 6 hours so we wouldn't be flanked. She died waiting for an airlift that never came." Fourth, Private Jonah Hale. 19. He bled out holding my hand. Asked me to tell his mother he was brave. Fifth, Corpsman David Liu, our medic, gave me his last dose of morphine. Bled internally so I could keep crawling west. And the 6th, Specialist Marcus Brandt, our youngest. He died quiet, just stopped breathing. No one heard him go. Maya paused, then looked up. "These are their names. General, this is the weight of your layered priorities." General Vance's jaw tightened. "I don't recall the specific coordinates. I wasn't even briefed on Echo 9 beyond strategic outlines." Field intel updates are decentralized at that level. Command triage based on combat conditions. Captain Beck cut in. Sir, the override for their extraction was signed using your command authorization code. He turned to her sharply. Impossible. That signature would require. She placed a file on the table and flipped it open. Your signature block. Dated October 15th, 2016. Redirect extraction to grid 54 SMB. Higher value asset inbound. That reroute pulled evac away from Camp Mercer. Maya reached into her pack again. This time she withdrew a small leather-bound notebook. Pages weathered. Corners frayed. She opened it slowly and turned it toward the others. Each page carried handwritten entries, ink blurred from sweat, blood, rain, medical updates, ammo counts, names, locations, transmissions logged by time. She read aloud 13:28 hours. Captain Ross, 2 critical. Grid confirmed. Where's the bird? 13:47 hours. Command redirect to 54 SMB. High priority asset en route. Echo 9 hold position. 13:52 hours. Captain Ross, negative movement. No transport. Repeating, no transport. Casualties escalating. Please respond. She looked up. No response followed. Ever. General Vance reached for the report, but hesitated. You kept all of this, he asked. His voice had softened. I was the comms specialist, Maya replied. Documenting was my job. Even after everything else fell apart, she pulled one last item from the folder, a USB stick. Captain Beck plugged it into the secure terminal. A video loaded. Helmet cam footage. It was shaky, muffled by static, but the voices were clear. Captain Ross crouched near a wounded soldier, blood soaking his uniform. He looked into the camera. If this makes it through, we're still at grid 41 SMB. They rerouted evac. We've got 3 down, 2 more critical. I don't know who made the call, but we're not going to make it out. If anyone finds this, tell them we held the line. The footage cut out. No one moved. General Vance's hands gripped the table. For the first time in the meeting, he didn't speak. Colonel Daniels, a staff officer seated near the corner, cleared his throat. His face had gone gray. I remember that signature, he said, voice hoarse. I was in the tactical relay center that day. I saw the reroute request. I questioned it, but I didn't say anything. Everyone turned. I thought maybe there was more context. Maybe there was something above our clearance. I convinced myself the decision was already made. He looked at Maya. I'm sorry. She didn't respond. She simply turned another page in the notebook. The JAG officer shifted in her seat. General, we now have written testimony, video record, and evidence of authorization. This constitutes a procedural override that directly led to the fatal abandonment of Echo 9. General Vance finally spoke. I wasn't told they survived that long. I thought, he stopped himself. You thought 6 people wouldn't make it 48 hours on foot through enemy terrain. You thought wrong, Maya said. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried. I crawled through mud and shrapnel for 2 days. Burned. No food. No radio. Carrying dog tags. Carrying this. She laid the notebook flat again. Because I couldn't let them disappear. Silence thickened. Captain Beck leaned forward. Sir, with respect, this isn't about blaming you alone. It's about recognizing that something failed, and it was never corrected. The general's fingers brushed the scorched edge of Captain Ross's tag. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I followed doctrine, he said quietly. I followed the framework we were given, and it cost lives, Maya said. Don't hide behind doctrine. Doctrine didn't sit with them while they died. She opened the notebook one last time, a final page. Taped inside was a folded photograph, 6 soldiers, mud-streaked, smiling, leaning on each other beneath a torn field tent. One of them, Maya, younger, with a clean uniform and tired eyes, stood in the back. Captain Ross had scrawled something on the bottom corner in black marker. If we fall, let someone remember. General Vance's hands were shaking now. He stared at the photo, then at the dog tags, then at the woman who had returned from fire in silence, only to be erased. He stood, not fast, not proud, but deliberate. He faced Maya, and for the first time in his 3-decade career, he saluted her. The room was still. Maya didn't return the salute. She simply nodded once, slowly, then gathered the notebook, the photo, and the tags. "These don't belong to me anymore," she said. "They belong to history." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, her voice stopped the room again. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's legacy. I'm here to make sure theirs isn't buried under it." Then she stepped out into the hallway. The steel door hissed shut behind her. Later that evening, Captain Beck found her sitting on the concrete steps behind the hangar, staring out toward the trees. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Beck asked, "Do you think it'll change anything?" Maya took a long breath. "No," she exhaled. "But now, it can't be ignored." Inside the command center, General Vance remained in the room alone, still seated, still staring at a burned metal tag in his hand. General Vance stood in front of Maya's desk the following morning, stripped of his ribbons, wearing only the standard fatigues. His expression was worn, far from the polished man who'd entered the assembly hall days earlier. He offered no speech, no justification, just a quiet, strained apology. "I failed them, and I failed you." Maya looked at him for a long time, then spoke. "I don't need an apology, General. I need their names spelled right, carved deep, and never forgotten again." She didn't wait for his response. That afternoon, the wind picked up along the eastern edge of Fairbanks Field. The concrete beneath the radar station had been cleared. Workers poured a new foundation without fanfare or ceremony. Just outside the restricted zone, a temporary black shroud hung over a rectangular slab of polished steel. 6 names had been etched into the surface: Ross, DeWitt, Fan, Hale, Lou, Brandt. No ranks, no embellishments, just names. Below them, one line, Echo 9. They held the line. She walked it home. There were no speeches, no cameras, just 23 people in uniform. Most of them had only recently learned what Echo 9 even was. Among them stood Lieutenant Sarah Lohman, Captain Beck, and a small group of junior enlisted soldiers who once laughed behind Maya's back. Now, they stood with their heads bowed. Later that week, Maya was in the back of the mess hall when 2 privates approached her. Their hands were clenched nervously behind their backs. One of them, Private Klein, spoke first. "Ma'am, I used to think you were just background." The other chimed in. "We made jokes, called you Ghost. We didn't know." Maya didn't look up from her tray. She stirred her coffee. It's easier to ignore someone when you don't want to ask what they've seen. Then she looked at them, really looked, and added, "Don't carry guilt. Carry truth. That's heavier, but it doesn't rot." They nodded. Quiet. Klein held out a folded note. From the barracks wall. Someone wrote it after the ceremony. "We thought maybe you'd want to see it." She unfolded the page. She never asked for rank. She earned something harder: silence. Survived. She didn't smile, but her fingers didn't tremble as she folded it back. Inside the administrative wing, Captain Beck led a quiet project. With the help of Sarah Lohman and a few others, they recovered the full personnel file of Echo 9. Witness reports, operation logs, final telemetry records, the erased map coordinates, even the after-action report that had been marked closed, fatal. They compiled everything, reconstructed the chain of decisions, uncovered inconsistencies, and then they built the Echo Registry, a digital archive locked under Beck's own security credentials, a space to remember unofficial names, quiet casualties, units like Echo 9 that had been scrubbed from the system in favor of smoother narratives. It wasn't official policy, but it was there, permanent. General Vance submitted his resignation that same week. No public statement, no interview, just a short internal memo. I failed to safeguard the truth. I can no longer lead others to chase it. The email was forwarded through command channels and eventually reached Maya's inbox. She didn't open it, she archived it, and moved on. 3 days later, during an introductory training seminar for new medical field recruits, an instructor paused the session to let a guest speak. A tall young woman, Private Jessa Reeves, stepped forward. She wore no medals, her boots were too new, but her voice was steady. I was going to specialize in communications. Thought it was safe, quiet. Then I learned about Echo 9, about a medic named David Liu who gave up his kit so someone else could live. She looked down for a beat. I want to be that kind of medic. Silence followed. Then, one by one, others nodded. Later that night, she wrote a message and tucked it beneath a stone at the memorial wall. I'll continue it, I promise. Maya's quarters remained unchanged for another week. Her locker still held the same folded towels, the same maintenance coveralls, the same standard issue boots, well worn at the soles. But on the 15th morning after the meeting, her bunk was empty, her duffel was gone. The only thing left behind was a small canvas pouch placed gently on her desk. Inside it were 6 objects: a strip of burned cloth from a torn Echo 9 shoulder patch, a black and white photo of the team beneath a shredded tent, a field compass, the glass cracked, a folding pocket knife engraved with R. Hail on the hilt, a vial of dirt sealed in resin, labeled Mercer Ridge, and a note, handwritten in uneven print. They never made it home, but they made me bring it. That's enough. Captain Beck found the pouch when she checked the tech bay. She didn't ask where Maya had gone. She didn't try to trace the orders. Somewhere in the system, a quiet personnel transfer had already processed. No flags raised, no questions asked. But one rumor passed between supply clerks and motor pool staff. She asked for the earliest assignment, remote, somewhere no one else wanted. Weeks later, at Camp Dreyfus, a small weather-exposed outpost near the Wyoming border, a junior officer looked up from his clipboard as a civilian technician arrived. The woman wore a gray logistics jacket, no nameplate, no visible rank. She moved with quiet familiarity straight to the comms locker, no hesitation. He almost asked her to identify herself, but before he could, an older staff sergeant leaned over and whispered, "Let her work. That's the one they say. Doesn't salute." The officer blinked. He looked again. She was already inside, kneeling beside a dusty panel, untangling fiber cables, not rushing, not hesitating, just working. Like someone who'd done it before, too many times to count. Later that month, the sergeant from Camp Dreyfus visited the new memorial wall at Fairbanks Field while on leave. He didn't say much, just stared, and noticed something strange. 6 small American flags had been placed at the base of the steel plaque. No card, no signature. But one was different. The 6th flag had a tiny ribbon tied around the stick, a red one, frayed at the edge. The kind medics used to tag critical wounds. No one could say for sure who left it, but those who'd served long enough, who'd seen silence carry more weight than sound, understood. Maya was still out there, somewhere, maybe on another base, another forgotten outpost, fixing cables, resetting weapons arrays, picking up brass casings before anyone else arrived. She wouldn't salute. But now, wherever she walked, people stood a little straighter. And sometimes, not always, but just sometimes, they saluted first,